Today, Seventh Planet Broadcast and TRT Revolution and Matt LaCroix are all together, and we're going to go deeply into 3 different books. The first issue that comes up is out of Manly P. Hall's book, and we're going to go through and kind of connect some really esoteric stuff for you, which is my job to wake up in you. That's really profound.
So just link it really quick to a great metaphor for this, the movie Groundhog Day.
Jumping over to page 76 on the Lost Teachings of Atlantis, led by the great being who became known as the Atlantian Amadeus, then known later as Thoth, and eventually well known as Jesus much later. Yeah. Talking about, they also in the Mesoamerican culture, they considered the Palenque god, who was Lord Pakal, also known as Votan, right, incarnation of Thoth. And I hadn't come out and said this for a while because I didn't have enough data, but I always believed that. And actually, when I asked that question on my tour of Palenque, the music video I did, the question I asked right at the beginning was, so who really was Lord Pakal?
The real question is, who was Lord Pakal?
Okay, this wizard king of Palenque, whose sarcophagus stone led to the decoding of the Mayan codices. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out.
Let me ask you a question, Gerald, because we get this a lot, especially in the Decoders of Truth, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And Matt, you can answer this too. When we know that Thoth was a quote-unquote humanoid, all in his white robes and he's bearded and he's tall and we know all those things and he's got the trident and, is there any chance whatsoever that they could shapeshift into, because we know that they have the animal heads and whatnot too, but is there any evidence or proof whatsoever that they were in original form, avatar body, a reptilian?
No.
Actually, what Thoth says when they first came to this dimension with the 32 avatars that landed in the halls of Amenti, those avatars didn't even need to take on a body. They were from a higher dimension that didn't even have a need for a body.
Like energy balls, probably.
That's right. That's right.
Reptilian connection it's a fake thing with
Well, listen, I think it has a lot to do with the lower dimensional beings that were brought in as the sons of Belial, if you will.
Sons of Belial.
That Atlantis talks about. These serpent-type beings, which basically, not to confuse the dragon and the serpent that Thoth is using, I think symbols used to overlap to smear other symbols, okay?
Yeah, not the reptile.
That says the derailment.
I think these were the strange-looking beings that were shown in the Ubaid period in Eridu, where they looked alien, they looked reptile.
Like lizard people or something.
But they certainly were not the images of the gods and the Anunnaki or even the Ajiji that were shown in depictions, okay? They all looked like we do, even though they were bigger.
That's the whole point behind it, so everybody knows is that we are them. They look exactly like us. They genetically altered us because Gerald talks about this too, and we talk about in the screenplay. When they came here, they had to find some kind of a species that was similar enough that they could use the genetics to match it. And the Neanderthal was close enough to their humanoid type of mammalian system that it was enough of a match that they could essentially jumpstart us millions of years. And that's what we represent, is we're them, but we're just far ahead of where we would have been.
Well, what about the opportunity or the thought process too that when they came here, because again, the timelines are skewed. We know they were here 400,000 or 500,000 years ago, right? At least we believe that. What about the possibility that there were still reptoid / dinosaur, sauropod type, life forms here, and that they messed with them too? Because we have proof that not Ninmah, but Nin Hersag and Enki and the geneticists and them, they were playing around with a lot of different life forms, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, this goes back to the Alien Roswell interview. And first of all, before we do that, it looks to me like these higher dimensional beings can take on any form they want in this dimension. If they want to be a dragon and fly around, they can do that. If they want to be
That's why it changes.
a man coming out of the ocean with a fish body and a human upper torso, I believe they can do that. I truly believe they can do that.
It has to be.
So in the Alien Roswell interview, it talks about all the geneticists throughout the galaxy that designed life forms for different planets. Okay, and all the different ones that have been showing up here as well. So the idea that we were just genetically created and not all these other life forms, I think that's ludicrous. I think there's been all kinds.
That's an important part to make it
going on through all time. And as far as these serpent beings that came out in the time of Atlantis and occupied the bodies of people in high authority, they said they eradicated them for a while, but they didn't eliminate them all. They ended up going into underground facilities and hiding out. Well, guess what? That shows up in the Alien Roswell interview as well. They talk about those beings.
And they're
back. Yes, they are back. And he warned us they would come back, didn't he?
And so here's a really easy way to tell. Anytime you ever see anything having to do with like a blood sacrifice, it's automatically connected to them.
That's right. That's right. And listen, I'm going to be very controversial here right now. It only has to be symbolic as well. So anybody that's being convinced that God eating is a healthy thing, listen, if you're eating the bread that represents the body and drinking the wine that represents the blood, you're partaking in the rites Thoth warned you not to do. It's the same thing. Because you're inviting those entities into your avatar host as soon as the rites and the blood are present. This is right from the Emerald Tablets, okay?
Well, I gotta clap. Because Gerald, I hope for everybody that's watching right now in the Decoders of Truth, Gerald just gave you guys the cipher, okay?
Billions of people.
They're cooking.
Billions.
But guess all these people that are doing this without even doing live human sacrifice or using live human blood, just the actual act of the forgery is still summoning these entities into this realm and allowing them to possess them.
That's right. That's right. So the idea of possession, watch the movie They Live Again. That's a documentary to me, and it was to the producer as well.
And that's why
the idea of the avatar being able to be overtaken energetically, occupying chakras that you're not in control of, this is reality to me, and I've been watching what's going on in the world.
Gerald, somebody asked a really good question about that today, and Matt, you can answer this too. So if you were, and again, let's set this up. The elites, when they do these blood sacrifice rites, the Bohemian Grove, there's other things. Obviously, we know about spirit cooking because it's in popular agenda now, but if you were to kill one of these beings while they had this entity, this Archon, whatever, in them, the Sons of Belial, the Dark Brotherhood, whatever, if you were to kill a physical human right then and there, Gerald, took out their meat modem avatar, would that spirit die or that entity die, or would it just jump right into the next organism?
Well, I think it would, depending on their management system for energy, which looks to be very sophisticated in the historical records, Ereshkigal and Metatron, or what was his name, Nergal. He was the chief deity of the underworld for the Anunnaki, and later it became Hades, right, in the Greek system. Well, the idea of your energy coming out of your meat host, being trapped into this holographic prison, and then being reincarnated into body. Now go back and look at the holographic diagram I did from Thoth. Whereas if you don't have that Ba activated in you, you don't even get out of the duat. You never even leave.
No shit.
The sphere of this third dimensional prison planet.
Well said.
So, right. And what happens when there aren't any bodies available? And guess who answers this? It shows up with Zane talking about it, and also in Manly. If there are no bodies for these entities to go in, then, and actually this is right out of Manly P. Hall, where he's talking about the spheres in the Poimander. They go off into the rings of Saturn, and they sit there, and they sit there, and sit there, until the great wheel stops again. Well, what is the great wheel? This is the processional wheel of the equinox that comes around at the great year every 25,920 years. That's what he's talking about. And this coincides with the Mayan teachings and also from what Thoth taught us in the Emerald Tablets. So the idea that Poimander is telling us that, it makes it very real for me. So anyway, let's go on down to what Zane is talking about later in page 118 of the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Now, Zane, remember, is the monastic master, okay? And his student was Pope John Peniel, who wrote this book. Okay?
Right.
Very good book for anybody who hasn't read it. So the master is talking to Zane extensively about how the demiurge controls us, and that ultimately, as I read before on page 407 of Manly P. Hall, right at the bottom, in the doctrine of selfishness, this is what the Adam was, or the Satan figure was able to lead the Adam to, was a selfish state where he was trying to satiate his desires all the time, never waking up to his true essence, right? Knowing he was immortal, okay? So in that, so Jay, go through this and talk about how selfishness and greed and all this, that Zane really sees this as the main problem in the world. Can you extrapolate from selfishness of, in an individual place all the way to what we're seeing in the world? I know you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just say, I mean, first off, that book, Monica's reading that book, as I told you guys, right now in Hawaii. God bless her. So she's going to move herself into the next level, which is amazing. So the whole world's problem today is a focus on things that they can't control, which is, again, the ego. It's just the material want, the possessions, the stuff. And everyone, and I don't want to say everyone from an extreme standpoint, but the majority of people in the world today who are enslaved in their mind, it's because of the focus on that ego-driven life, which is the wants of materialism and all of these things. And, you know, Zane in the book is trying to basically teach John Peniel that in order to free yourself, you have to detach from the material of the world. And again, I'll just use a point that Manly Hall and the Words to the Wise, which we're going to get to, talks about that it literally in every chapter of the book. And it's not until you can release yourself of the ego mind and the ego want construct that you can truly allow yourself to experience the actual path to illumination. And again, the path is hard, as we know, and it's long, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. And, you know, I'll put the Dr. Strange. Remember when the ancient one is talking to Dr. Strange and says, well, how did you become a great surgeon? Practice and consistency. Discipline and practice. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, that's true. And you know, I don't think there's any, just to kind of go down the Krishnamurti path, I don't think there's a process that you could give out to somebody and go, here, follow this, and you'll get from point A to point B, and you'll find universal consciousness. You won't be selfish anymore. No. Part of what happens is I think we truly have to be connected to the sources of knowledge. And I know we're going to get to this in the Words of the Wise, which is also from Manly P. Hall. But the idea of us having to go through and do some work, whether it's just choosing to do some practice every day that leads you to higher consciousness or higher energy. And I like to do it as a scientist. You know, the whole foo-foo-y new age concept of a higher vibration and blah, blah, blah. Well, when you put it into mathematics, though, and see that there are things that you can control to implement this discipline and this pursuit of a higher state. And some of them are very practical, everything down to what you eat, what you're watching on TV, and how you sit in a chair. You know, what relationship are you having in this? So all of that's great stuff, and I won't get too tough. But on the next point, Jay, Peniel asked Zane, what, you know, am I doing this? Am I going out and killing other people and doing all these things and impeding on other people's wills? No. So why am I a problem? And that's when the master turns on him and says, you know, selfishness. He still saw him as selfish. And until he saw that he had gotten out of his way, allowed light to work through him from the universal consciousness, and serve his community selflessly, not expecting anything back no matter what happens. Okay, and he actually distinguishes here. He's like, no, don't fix yourself first. How long could you be stuck in that state before you ever take on this principle of serving others? He goes, do that first, forget about yourself, and see what happens. And I think it's very profound what he says here.
But Gerald, you can correlate. Go ahead.
But because we're so caught up in our skewed perception prison that creates our ego and our personality of these five senses, we never look at this alternative possibility that we have an energy within us that's eternal, that can be woken up, and it changes everything. And actually, the good news is, in the Poymander discussion where he's talking about the pathway for those that are seeking light, he says that for those that are seeking truth and are willing to do the disciplined work to get there, you will be protected. He will guard you from your lower nature so that you can find the mind that he wants to wake up within you, which was the mind of the creator of all, that was put into all of us. It's already there. It just has to be woken up, right? So
let me talk about selfishness for a minute, Gerald.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
You know, if you look at why is it so hard to get over this idea of illusions of all these things around us that are tricking us? And what I see the biggest problem is all the social constructs and all the things that lead us up until being adults, where we have that perception of finally making choices that we can without having parents. And once we reach that point, we've already gone through an entire brainwashed life of this coercion to be the best you can, step on everyone else. You see in every mentality that we can possibly get. You do everything you can for yourself and for maybe just your family, and that's it. You just step on all the rest until you get to the top. And
Right.
that very idea that has sunken into everyone's minds is this very selfishness concept. And Zane speaks about how these demiurges that control us, that prevent us from actually finding our spiritual self and finding a way out of this prison planet, he says the root of all of them is selfishness, because selfishness leads to hate, then leads to greed and lust. All these things derive from one single thing, that if we can realize that we're not doing all of this for ourselves here, and we're part of something greater, we're part of the timeline of humanity, as on this, this ship of Earth as we travel through these celestial star systems. And if we realize that and we start doing things to better our lives and those around us, start teaching someone else, start going out of your way to do something nice for others, and then build on that, everything will change in your life, because then you start breaking free of this selfishness that Zane speaks of, represent the ultimate chains that hold us down.
I wanted to
so
go back.
All we have to do is remember that.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something while I was thinking about it. Earlier on in the Lost Teachings of Atlantis, Zane is explaining that everybody was enslaved, and that these masters who had ascended and were in another dimension decided to re-descend, just like Emerald Tablets tells, these 32 masters, right? They decided to take on form in this dimension in order to break up this enslavement that was going on by the demiurges. And so part of that process of them taking on a body where they were hermaphroditic originally, where they were both sexes according to them, and that when they had to actually come into this dimension and take on an avatar body, the dualism rules here, right? So you got the good and the light. So they had to have male and female, which separated them physically. And in addition to that, what they did not expect, and only the most adept masters who were in complete touch with the source did not lose contact with the source through the incarnation of the body, the chakras being shut down, and all the other things that the demiurgus had set up. And I think they were quite surprised by that even they who came here to help got enslaved. Now, if that's the case, I just want to lay this out. If that's the case, and even the masters were able to be enslaved, you think about how hard it is for us who've never been, according to, or maybe we have, very, very difficult to break out of this.
Well, Gerald, it brings up another good point. I mean, the pleasures of flesh. I mean, Enki had a taste for it. I mean, look at the women that he engineered in South America.
Yeah, exactly.
So this physical sense of, like you said, the chakras being cut off and sensing things only in the five senses is still highly pleasurable when we're in this physical flesh, meat mode.
Exactly.
So it's a difficult thing to resist.
Yeah.
Here's a concept to consider as well. During this, if the creator of all is pulling the strings behind both dark and light, and it's, ultimately figuring out how much balance the demiurgus Enlil has to not throw the whole thing off for this. Maybe the idea is that, like Gerald said, it did become such a powerful mind control aspect of all the illusion of Ka here, that they had to send in these ascended masters, because if they didn't, we simply would never ever get anywhere. We would probably annihilate ourselves. And so the only way to break free of this illusion here was to literally send in some of the greatest ascended masters of light that they had. And even they were, like you said, some of those warriors were enslaved and never did not wake up.
Well, I have to say something really crazy. Zechariah Sitchin was the editor of Atlantis Rising, the magazine, when he died.
Right.
Well, the concept that was laid out in the Lost Teachings of Atlantis previously, where he said these Essene bodies were being crafted to be, the perfect vessels for the future incarnations of Thoth and his boys or girls into those bodies. I think that's happening right now. And I've been watching this for the last couple of years. I think Atlantis is rising, and I think the Atlantean advanced beings and many others are landing in avatar bodies. And I really think anybody who's now understands who Thoth is, that they've already been landed in, or they wouldn't be on that path, okay? Because these are...
Who's Thoth, Gerald? Who's Thoth?
Well, yeah. Well, he's actually, Thoth is my hero. He's the one that decided to stay here and do battle with the dark forces through the age of darkness until it was over, like he said, right? So we talked about a little bit, I'm going off topic a little bit here. We talked a little bit about the dark and light, what's going on in the perception of choosing this elective or that elective, or this way of living or that way of living. It's still going on in a very, very similar way that it's always been going on. I don't think it's changed. I think the constructs of this slave planet simulator have been quite consistent, even though the demiurgus methods show up differently in every civilization. Well, so does the light, right? It's always these, here's the enslavers and here's the one who's going to save them. This is the basis of our archetypal hero story that's so important to all of us. Where every movie is based on this archetype of 120 pages, and you got the beginning, the middle, and the end, and you got to have this conflict, and the hero reaches dark night of the soul before he overcomes this, or she, and then achieves this break free of the demiurgus system. I mean, that's really what I think it's all about.
You see. If you go on like Netflix right now and you look at what's popular, everything is based around the idea of a hero. It's based on being extraordinary, becoming more than a regular human, and doing something to like further humanity. And you can see that to me, I see that as being a side of the media in Hollywood that is the side of the light, the side of thought,
it is positive.
That is trying to awaken this hero that has been lost within us, that needs to remember.
So hold on, let me stop you right there, because you just blew my mind apart. Did you guys, I'm hopeful, I know you probably haven't, Gerald, but Matt, did you see Suicide Squad?
Maybe the first one. It was a movie a while ago.
The one that came out like 4 months ago in the summer.
No, I haven't seen the newer.
Okay, so check this out. There's a scene at the end. It's actually the enemies are the Anunnaki, or a simulation of the Anunnaki. It's this woman called the Enchantress. She's this ancient Isis type archetype, and then her brother is like this giant Anunnaki warrior. You guys should actually, for the movie, for the screenplay, you should look at the comics. You can Google it, see him, what he looks like.
Yeah.
Says at the end of the show, and I only know this because my daughter, again, no coincidence is like, my daughters were watching this the other day, and I'm like, how the hell did you guys get this? And 8 years old, 6 years old, they already know sites to freaking steal movies, and they're watching it on their computer, and I'm looking at it, and the woman, the Enchantress, says, "It's okay. Embrace your metahuman side. That is the future." There it is, right there in the movie.
Nobody thinks it's real. They all think it's just a joke.
I flipped out. I literally ran to the computer and told my daughter, I said, "Stop." She's all flipping out on me. She's like, "Dad, we're watching this." I'm like, "Go back.
But you know what the basic thing is? That's what mind-blowing is about all this stuff, Jay.
It's
countless things we talk about. Movies, TV shows. This stuff is trying to awaken this hero and
preparing us to let us know that we do have, as Gerald said very poignantly, these latent DNA circuits that will arise and turn on and waken and give us, quote unquote, superpowers. Give us the powers of the Anunnaki.
It's because this is the time when we're supposed to awaken, Gerald.
Yeah,
We've gone through cycles.
I hope Luc Besson's portrayal of Lucy, where we can become light beings if we want to completely, I think that's fantastic. Now you couple that with the Doctor Strange discussion where the Ancient One knocks him out of his energy body and he first experiences himself, his true self, his energy form apart from the body. And anybody who's had a out-of-body experience, and that's millions of people, okay, would recognize that that's true, because when that happens, you realize you are immortal. You are an immortal soul.
Right.
And whether you take on and have a body or not, that's for whatever dimension you're in, right? So,
and one of the things that is very difficult for people to get past is, why is now so important? They just can't conceive the idea that right now could be that important. And I just look at all throughout history what's changed in only 150 to 200 years, and how you went from someone trying to even speak about even just a shallow spiritual side could be burned at the stake. We're talking about some kind of a plant that could heal or something.
A person of color wasn't even a human being.
Well, let's correlate a couple things, Matt. Let's correlate a couple things. From the Mayan long count forward, we know that we're in the time frame that they believe was called the universal consciousness. There's that term that comes right out of the lost teachings of Atlantis.
Yes.
You think that's a coincidence? I don't.
Right.
And in the Poimander discussion earlier, he talked about when the great wheel stops, okay? We're talking about that time frame right now when we go through the galactic center at the precession of the equinox in the age of Aquarius. Aquarius is lined up with the galactic center, okay?
That's why I'm so optimistic, my friend.
Well, I'm optimistic too. But I
still
looking at what they put in their words here, okay? And I'm going to skip all the way to words of the wise from here, okay? Because we've talked about this. I believe there are certain things that still have to happen for those that are in the simulator in order for them to never want to choose war again. And I think we're still, just this close to that happening. After that, I do believe.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think we've got to go possibly a full degree into the age of Aquarius as they transition from one rulership model to another, okay?
But Gerald's right. You're right, Gerald. I mean, we all know, we keep saying it, Matt said it at the very beginning of the show, right, when we went live, but there is definitely its darkest before the dawn. And as Gerald said, there are so many things that have not yet happened. Every single religious text or manuscript talks about their, apocalypse, their revelation. All of these things are clearly a sign that that stuff is not a coincidence. And they are going to manifest at some point. It just, at the level, in my mind at least, my opinion, what level of darkness will happen before we transition?
Well, I was going to bring up some of the stuff of Earth changes from the lost teaching of Atlantis. I think we ought to take that and put it into a separate show, because I think it'll take us off track here. So I want to kind of
Gerald, let me just make a quick comment on that.
Okay, go ahead.
To the eyes of some, religions collapsing all of the world from their perceptions and monetary systems collapsing would look like a dark outcome. But to others who realize that those are the very things that were holding us back, that would be seen as something from the light. So we must understand that everything is just...
I totally agree. I totally agree. So, the people that are making those changes to take away bad government, bad economic models, bad fuel sources, they're being seen as the enemy.
People.
Yeah, they're being seen as the enemy right now, but the reality is they may be very connected to the light sources that are making the changes.
I got one thing I just got to tell you, this profound little thing that I just realized the other day. You ready for this? On what we just said a second ago, on what we perceive as being dark, but is actually something of light. One of the things we talk about is this massively unsustainable, how the elites have been polluting the earth with petroleum and all these oil-based products, and now CO2 is all these things. What if the whole point with that was to allow that, because during this transition of these, the whole idea of a pole shift being possible from the Nibiru and an atmosphere being degraded, and the only way you could protect it, and Gerald knows this, that Nibiru was protected for hundreds of thousands of years, not millions, because they had active volcanoes that were going off at the time of those passings. So if you have large amounts of CO2 that are built up in an atmosphere from all these industrial ages that are going through, that coincide with the exact same time that Nibiru is passing through, you literally could be actually protecting your planet with what seems like you're polluting it.
Yeah, originally, it could be both. It could have started out as something that was noble, and then was contaminated with somebody who wanted you breathing in nanoparticles, so you died. By the way, so the next book that we're moving on to and Jay turned me onto this one right after reading the Manly P. Hall Secret Teachings of all the words to the wise. Can you see that? Manly P. Hall. It's not a very long book. You can see it's quite short, but some of the advice in here is very profound for the seeker, to kind of make you a little more sane and rational in this process of unraveling the mysteries. And there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of ways you can get tripped up, okay? Big time. So, Jay, you want to take number 11 and talk about this? Because I'd be glad to talk about the concept of it if you want to introduce it.
No, I'll talk about it. Let me just say one thing about that book first.
Okay.
What is even more, and by the way, again, Manly Hall, truly one of the most amazing esoteric authors and researchers ever, maybe the number one guy. Again, maybe Thoth was incarnated in him or connected to him in some capacity for him to do this kind of work, because to collate this type of data and wisdom is absolutely, it blows my mind to comprehend it.
I have to agree. That has to be probably one of my favorite books at this point. I've got lots of books and been through a lot of them.
Amazing.
But because of the profoundness of the information that he disclosed in there, if you wrap your head around that, it'll change your entire perception model. It did.
Right.
It did.
Yeah, it'll change your life. Well, just so, and then I'll let Matt jump in here. But
okay.
The book, so Words to the Wise, as Gerald says, 150 pages. He wrote this book right after the Great Depression. So he was a guy at that time in his life. There were a lot of new age gurus that were coming into the world to try to take people's money away. And, obviously it was the Depression. Most people today, especially in the Decoders of Truth, had no comprehension of what it was like to live in the Depression. Gerald, we know from our parents. Matt, you probably have grandparents that may have told you stories. But it's a world that's so far removed from our construct of today's present day that no one really comprehends it. But imagine literally going a week and eating 2 or 3 times. Okay, well, most people couldn't comprehend that, but that's where it was. So anyway, that's the kind of 80,000 foot version of why he wrote this book, or where he was in his life when he wrote this book. But the book is so amazing. To get to that point in 2 seconds, he wrote the prologue in 1928, and then he came back, right, Gerald? 30 years. I think it
was 36. Was it 36 or 28?
Well, 1936, I think, right. And then he came back 32 or 33 years later and rewrote the prologue again.
So there's 2 prefaces. So the first preface is very different than the second one. It's actually quite amazing. Amazing. He actually did that in his change of perspective, but he didn't change the material. He still believed it was valid.
No.
Yeah.
He didn't. So anyway, the point is, I'll just read it, from our little notes here. But inspiration is a relationship with universal truth, much to be desired, and the end towards which all learning must eventually lead. So what is the source of inspiration? So for me, and obviously Hall, he has a serious deep dive about this in the book. But the average person, realistically, in the world today, it's very difficult for anybody, for all of us, really, it doesn't matter your intellect or how much you've read, to really full on take what's the difference between your imagination and what's truly inspiration. So from a standpoint of what are you reading and what are you measuring, what are you taking in your life, it's very hard to see or differentiate those 2 things. But for me, and this is the main point, and I'll just kind of seek it from that book, and that was that the greatest pursuit is truth. And if that's your calling in life, which is obviously all 3 of ours, as researchers and scientists and whatever, to just continually learn and to bring in more knowledge to our, intellects and our wisdom as we get older and stuff like that. To me, that is the most important thing, but you can't lose sight of the other things, which is if you're on the path of illumination, which the path of illumination is obviously eliminating the ego and living a life where you're living in the now and you're not worried about tomorrow or you're not thinking about yesterday. And so there's so many things.
Matt, what do you see? And we can get down to definitions if you want or not, but how would you distinguish the difference between inspiration from imagination? How would you distinguish them?
So, the first thing to understand is that imagination is extremely important towards understanding an individual is unique. They must first contain imagination. But that's not the end of the story, because if someone has imagination, to then do something with what they have, they have to be inspired. They must have a drive to accomplish something. There has to be an end of a means to an end for what they're doing. And Gerald talked about how Hermes Thoth has mentioned how there have been thousands of incarnations that he's had during the course of this period of our timeline, and how these beings look for those who have inspiration in them, and then those are who they incarnate. This interview we have in our lifetime of what we're doing with our time and how we're driving our own path. If we have that little spark, that Ba energy inside us, that spark of inspiration, then we get that incarnation. We get to unfold those lessons before us, and the time gets spent for us as a student. And for those, and it mentions this specifically, for those in many different teachings, Hermetic teachings, for those who are of wickedness and cruelty and who are not of a pure and inspirational intention, the time is not wasted on them until they can grow up until that point. So I think maybe inspiration built on top of imagination is the first sign of one of these heroes along the path of eventually becoming a Hermetic teacher.
I took something a little different from him, because he was warning us about distinguishing between imagination and inspiration. And for me, I'm one of those writers, and the reason I bring this up is I'm one of those writers that I don't write unless I'm inspired. So I don't write every day, a book or a manuscript, whatever. And so I know the difference between when I'm in my normal state than when I'm in the state where I feel like I'm inspired to get something very significant, very specific done. And I think we all can kind of sense that distinction between our normal energy and the energy where we're just on fire, right? And it goes cyclically. It's not all the time. Some people, maybe it is.
No.
For me, it's not. So I can tell the difference between when I'm inspired versus not. Now, the distinguishment for imagination is you can be inspired with a dream, with a concept, with, Thoth possibly having a walk-in with you and disclosing something to you, whatever that is, that higher state of knowledge that gets dispelled to or gets given to you as a seeker. But what you do with your imagination is quite another matter. So in other words, you could see something happen and then describe an event to somebody using your memory and your imagination to try to fill in the details. You can be completely wrong, right? So what I'm saying is your imaginings can run wild. They can lead to delusional states if you don't have the discernment of what it is your mission is, how you're being animated to do it versus thinking you're the reincarnation of Christ or whatever, where you let your imagination go completely wild and every synchronicity, to you is reality, and there's no distinction or judgment there. And I think we're going to get to that later in some of the warnings from Manly P. Hall. But for me, I kind of agree with the Greeks that inspiration comes from the gods. So
Gerald, real quick, could you just hit on something pretty massive? We could go a million miles deep on this, but so my idea today is about that stuff. The difference is that social media has created this massive false construct, and so many people are living their lives based on the quote-unquote delusion of what they're seeing on social media, whether it's created by themselves or created by others, right? Because we all know that almost everything we find on social media isn't probably what's true. There's so much manipulation, there's photoshopping, there's so much stuff going on. So you're creating this false construct, to me, that allows people to live in the imagination or the delusion. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, hopefully that's not happening with the DOT social media site. And I think you're exactly right. I think there's levels of knowledge, and I think the lowest level of knowledge is the hearsay and the gossip that was described by Plato in the allegory of the cave. And I think that's what you're seeing in social sites is, instead of being in the cave where nobody sees it, now it's out in the public media for everybody to see. And, so that doesn't mean there's not truth out on the internet or in social media sites, but there's a lot of allegory of the cave.
I think it's important for people to remember, with the vast amount that's flooding us, that is just seems like it's contradicting us from every level. We kind of have to understand that building a foundation based on our intuition inside is the only way we're going to get out of this.
Right.
You have to realize that there are connections to be made, and that this isn't all just random information that has been created in the imagination of someone's mind, but is in fact very important truth that must be known. And the only way to distinguish that is to lay down foundations of what you know within yourself is true, understanding the reality around us with visible light and gravity, and then building on top of things like understanding the physical world, of how the world works around us, how tides work and how storm systems come through. If you have no awareness of anything around you, then those things that then come through and influence you online will have that much more of an impact, because you won't have the awareness to say that that's not right. So we must fill ourselves with as much truthful information, following objectively intuition within us, and then build layers on that, because be very careful how easy it is to be misled by things that sound good, and then you find out that you're just kind of floating in limbo without having any kind of a tether back to the ground again.
I want to do one last thing on inspiration that just came to my mind. It says in Manly P. Hall's book here that he believed, there's an intrinsic search for truth and then an extrinsic search where you look outside yourself, whether it's old documents, teachers, whatever. He gave most of his value to the truth that's derived from being inspired through your intuition, recognizing that inspiration as your direct connections with a higher dimension, the creator of all, whatever you want to call it. But he believed that form of truth was more true, and it only has to be true for you than any other truth. And I have to agree with that.
I agree 100%. So let me give you a hypothetical. It's right on this. I know we got 2 more points we want to hit, but so how much of, and I'm not talking about politics, it's just a question, but how much of Hillary losing was actually engineered, again, it's hypothetical for both of you guys, was actually engineered to create the social media cycle effect, all this sadness and all this other stuff, the rioting in the streets, the craziness that so many people are observing? What is the likelihood that was actually the plan?
I would say greater than 80%. And the fallback plan, if it didn't happen, would have achieved the same result either way. I think they had
the idea was they had to create a construct where we have chaos to change the conditions that have been allowed to have such a rampant elite corporates that have controlled the world. So the only way to do that would be produce an environment where chaos makes the population have to reject it.
Yeah. So true or false for both of you, they're engineering revolution.
They're creating it. They're forcing revolution.
Yes, that is true. That's true.
Okay, go ahead to the next point.
But I think it ultimately will lead to a potential unenslavement this time because of the timing of it all. But because of the timing of it all, this particular one might be darker than ones we've seen even before. That's my concern.
We just have to see. I'm sure on their end, it's a nightmare to consider. Like, how do you disclose what has been a massive cover-up of our ancient history and the truth of who we really are without dropping such a big bombshell that all of these...
You know how it's done. They have a giant neural network that they've been feeding from every social media site, every other, that's the giant brain that's learning, if you do this, then the output of a neural network is prediction and pattern recognition, right? So you put in, this one wins, and you see okay, get this on out here. They're so engineering the response of the sheeple and the slaves. It is unbelievable.
Exactly. So Jay, getting back to all these TV shows and movies that you watch and you're like, your mind is being blown while everyone else is just kind of walking out saying, that was fun. That's all being engineered to subconsciously prepare us for this time of revolution.
To the aware amongst us, which again, I think we all three agree it's less than 5% of people.
Well, like I said before, if these masters incarnated in these bodies and they were susceptible to the illusion of Ka, not being able to get out, the average person, this is going to take us to the next point, the true self is so beset with snares, pitfalls, and illusions that the novice cannot safely attempt this path until they're either driven by some noble motive and they're very disciplined in and of themselves, or they have a high degree of support, like a group like DOT, where they can actually go and put out an idea, not get lambasted, and potentially deal with some of this stuff that the true self has been so beset for intentionally. So
it's like a giant maze, this giant dark maze, and there's this very simple straight light path that seems like it's the light, where it's the illusion of material matter, and everyone's running towards it. But the long way through all the dark forest and tangling through brambles is the only way through, but nobody else is taking it. So nobody wants to take that leap.
Because it's the path of harm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, I know we skipped the part about the earth changes, but I just wanted to say, that in this life, my kind of philosophy, meta-philosophy as an avatar, once I realized, and I actually had an advantage that I was very young having out-of-body experiences. And I had them so many times that I realized that it wasn't just me having a lucid dream. I was keeping journals and reading Robert Monroe's books, trying to figure this out. I've known for a very long time that my energy is eternal, and that this is the transient part of the material illusion of Ka. And in that sense, I'm like, as long as it's there and it can get my mission done, then it's good to go. But that was before I discovered that the body truly was your temple, and that you could have gradations of experience of the realization of universal consciousness if you sought that in this temple without just using it as a me host to get from point A to point B. Okay?
Yeah, you can't ignore the body completely. You have to understand that it's a piece of the puzzle towards connecting to your highest self.
Right, but it's not. But once you see it as only a vessel to get past the anchor, then when you find the light, you're like, yeah, well, I'll do the best I can to keep this alive. If the Earth changes are coming are so significant that we're all going to be wiped out with an asteroid or an Earth extinction level event, so be it. I don't care, because I know that it has to be part of the bigger plan for our avatar energy to be used somewhere else for something more noble.
Gerald, how about Manley says in the book? He says in the book, one person reaches illumination for every 100 years. And if you got that, which I think you have.
I did. It was shocking.
45 seconds, bam, you're back in your next feed host.
It's possible. Yeah, actually, I think he said two people. I think he said he was tempering your expectations about what you think you can achieve in one avatar lifetime in terms of gaining universal consciousness, right? That's what he was saying. Because he said universal conscious, number one, don't ever run from a situation out of fear. He goes, if you're not seeking universal consciousness the way that somebody's holding your head underwater, that you want air, you want it that bad, then you're not going to find it. So, the idea of where's the safest place in the world while Earth changes come, blah, 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 so I can save my selfish, transitory self. That is such an illusion. That's the part
back to selfishness.
That's the part of the fear they want everybody involved in. And that actually is part of your spiritual test, is to realize you are eternal, and this is not something to take and try to save while you haven't found universal consciousness.
Let me read something from the book. We don't have this, but I put this is one of my points. Yeah. I know we deleted. Let me read this.
I think I've said all I wanted to say for this one, but
it's right on yours. I'll just read it because it's just right what you said. So illumination is not a matter of 19 years or 9 million years. It is a matter of the unfoldment of the inward self. It may require 1,000 lives to release the soul powers from the entangling corruption of matter. Illumination is mankind's conscious entry into the spirit of understanding. It is the soul's coming of age. In the physical life, it is maturity. It is having outgrown the material illusions that dominate the infancy and childhood of life. But instead of worrying about this cosmic consciousness, let us dedicate our present life to a program of intelligent and reasonable progress. We are not trying to die perfect, but better than we were born.
Exactly. Listen, and we think, so when we set out on this path and we think, if I don't become an ascended master like Jesus, then it's a total waste of time. It's not.
Nope.
It's not. It's a process, and it's it's a very deep process, and you got to do everything you can to get there, right? Everybody okay? Well, listen, I'm gonna call it close to this one. I think it was very deep, and it addressed all the points that I wanted to share with my bros. the ones that will read the books and have these kind of discussions. So thank you both,
You guys got me so
Matt and
excited
Jay,
about
for
this.
doing that. I really appreciate it.